Caryma Sa'd is a criminal lawyer who specializes in landlord and tenant and cannabis law. Welcome back. Are you confused about the laws governing cannabis and how much you can possess, where you can use it, and more? Well, we have criminal lawyer Caryma Sa'd to help. Once again, here's Rachel Colic.
Hi, Caryma. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You are one of my favorite lawyers in this space, and we get to chat about this stuff all of the time. But I want us to really bring up to speed all of our viewers around the legalization of cannabis and what that really means for the average Canadian today.
Absolutely.
So I think let's start with sort of a general overview of what is legal now? How much can I possess and where can I get it from when we're talking about here in Ontario?
Good questions. So in terms of being out and about in public, you can have up to 30 grams of dried flower on your person. At home, wherever you live, there's no limits on how much you can store. So it's a matter of when you are in public, 30 grams. And as far as where you can get your cannabis, currently in Ontario, the only legal place to obtain is through the Ontario Cannabis Store, or if you are a medical user, then through the licensed producer that you've been working with. And you know, once you are able to grow at home, so right now there are no seeds available, but from that, people will be able to share the product of their plants.
So 30 grams is my possession while in public, but I can have as much cannabis at home as I feel like I need or want. And as you said, there will be the ability for every Canadian in every province to grow 4 plants at home. The challenge we have right now is there's no legal seeds to purchase to grow those 4 plants just yet, but I know that I'm excited to grow cannabis this year in my garden, so we're looking forward to those legislations coming out. Now, let's talk about the issue of what your home is and where you live and the difference that makes in terms of consumption at home. So if I'm someone who lives in a private residence, that's different perhaps than if I'm someone who lives in an apartment or a condo. Is that correct?
Definitely. So if you are a homeowner, you are the king of your castle, so you make your rules and you live by them, except if you happen to own a condo, in which case you will be subject to whatever condo rules or bylaws might exist about cannabis. And I've seen different approaches in my practice, and some condos are taking a more restrictive sort of ban type outlook where no cannabis, no tobacco, no plants, and others are a more liberal approach, so it depends. And if you are a tenant, again, are you a tenant in a condo, then you too will be subject to those rules. If you have a tenancy in a house or an apartment building, it depends on your landlord and what sorts of conversations you've been having. Typically, I think a landlord would have difficulty amending a lease after the fact. So if you've already been living somewhere, it will be difficult for a landlord to retroactively say, you're not allowed to do this otherwise legal activity. If you're signing a new lease, then there is more room for negotiation. So it's something that you want to have top of mind because it may be something that's important to you.
Yeah, that's really an important distinction. So if I have a lease with a friend or someone I know that's over a home and whatnot, and we've sort of created a lease between the two of us, that's something that we should have a discussion about and ensure that we are on a new understanding about how they feel about cannabis on the property. If I live in a condo of some kind, is it likely that I might find in my agreement already something stipulated around cannabis, or are you finding that most condos didn't have any kind of, maybe just around tobacco previously to this, and now they're having to shore up their agreements?
I think that's fair to say. It wasn't really something that was contemplated in a lot of cases. So now we are seeing brand new bylaws that do address and seek to fill that void. So again, it's a range of approaches that condo corporations are taking, and very important if you are a condo owner and this is something you care about, to participate in those discussions and the passing of those resolutions.
Absolutely. We sort of chatted a little bit off air, the idea that a lot of times cannabis is brought up to the idea that it might hurt people's property value in the sense that in a negative way, because cannabis was used there or grown there. But you made a great point that it might actually start to become the opposite for people who are cannabis friendly, trying to sell a condo to someone else that they are not allowed to consume cannabis in could create a whole new set of issues.
For sure. If you are reselling your condo and the purchaser is someone who's been enjoying their legal cannabis, and now there are stipulations that they won't be able to do that in the confines of their home, you might lose a purchaser.
Yeah. So always important, like we always say, to know your rights and to know the agreements that you have signed. And if they plan on making changes to those agreements upon you re-upping your lease, that you're at least aware. And like you said, that you've made your voice heard if this is a matter that's important to you. Yeah. And I know that you deal with this a lot in your practice, actually, sort of this tenant and lawyer. And there was one case that came out sort of in the summer, but a woman who claims to be sort of allergic to cannabis smoke. What are her rights in that instance where there's other people being affected, but perhaps there's someone like myself who's a medical patient in her building who is consuming that cannabis? So they both have rights, I presume. What is that situation like, and what do we really need to consider in these spaces?
So it becomes a balancing of rights. You know, ideally it happens out of court within sort of the condo corporation, at the board meeting level, or with an arbitrator of some sort. And if not, I could see something like that escalating to either Superior Court or the Human Rights Tribunal. Again, where you are balancing rights, I think the prevailing approach is you accommodate to the point of undue hardship. So as a medical patient, you know, your right to medicate is protected. As someone who has a severe allergy, she also would have a right to have, I suppose, maybe a filter set up in your place, or are we blocking the plumbing or air seepage? How do we work this out? Is she moving to a unit far away from you? So there are options that exist. If it gets to the point, though, that there is no way to have both people coexisting in the same space, the test is undue hardship.
It's so interesting. There's so many things to think about in terms of cannabis legalization now as the average Canadian sort of approaches the usage of the plant and what that means for their neighbors, their communities, their families, and whatnot. So we talked about possession, 30 grams when you're out in public. A lot of people are interested, can they share with someone else? Can I have a party and invite over my friends and, you know, lay out all of the beautiful things that I've bought from the OCS and invite them to consume with me? Is that something that's legal?
I think sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring.
You want to be mindful, you know, where are you sourcing your cannabis? That could potentially be an issue if something came up. And also, for sure, your guests, everyone has to be over the age of 19. Otherwise, you could run into some serious trouble in terms of distributing to a minor.
Yes, there are severe penalties for distributing to a minor. So it's always important to know how old your friends are before you share. But I think it's interesting. A lot of people are going to kind of do events, infused dinners, parties, and things like that to really bring cannabis into their life, which I think is really exciting. Now, I think one thing that's really important to talk about is driving. Driving in cannabis has been a huge issue, I know, in many different aspects of the laws. But I want people to understand, if they are, let's say, driving to a friend's house and they have their cannabis on them, what do they really need to think about when it's cannabis inside the car?
So best practice, I would say, is keep it somewhere it can't be accessed. So your trunk, I think, is the safest bet. And if you have it in the original packaging, so a sealed container of some sort, again, you are hedging your bets and minimizing any risk that you might face. Ultimately, you know, you can't be impaired while you are driving.
Right. So similar to alcohol in that sense, you never want it to be accessible by the driver. Always better safe than sorry. Traveling with cannabis has also been a really interesting topic, and I think there's been a lot in the headlines about people perhaps getting lifetime bans from the United States and things like that, and a lot of people are very concerned now about traveling with cannabis. What are the laws that we need to keep in mind there?
Well, it's a very uncertain political climate with the United States right now. What I can say with certainty is that federally cannabis is illegal in the US. So even if you are in BC crossing over to California, where it's legal provincially or federally and stateside as well, that strip of border is a potential roadblock. Right. So when crossing the border, I think it's paramount, don't lie, because that in and of itself can be cause for a ban. But if you find that the questions are taking a direction that you're uncomfortable with, there is the option of staying silent or rescinding your request to enter that day. So, live to fight another day, and not an easy decision to make, sure. Especially if you have travel plans or, presumably you're going for some sort of purpose. But there is so much uncertainty right now.
Yeah. So you can travel in Canada with it. So I can, get on a plane here in Ontario and fly over to see a friend in BC. Again, always, we always recommend that you keep them in containers, that it's, packed in your packed luggage that's going to go underneath the plane and things like that. But crossing any kind of international border is definitely still
it's
not
a non-starter.
Okay.
I don't recommend it, because you're going to find yourself probably in a hairy situation. And even traveling domestically, you want to be mindful of that 30-gram limitation.
Very important. Caryma, thank you so much for joining us today and clearing up all the facts for us.
Thanks for having me.